Hello, and welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I demystify life in France and debunk some of the many myths that surround living here. Now, today we're talking about some of the problems that people face living in France and some of the things that become the very small, insurmountable issues, shall we say, rather than problems, but they do add up. And again, this is something that comes up a lot on the forum, survivefrance.com, and it's a very useful outlet, I think, because people just need to moan sometimes. I mean, maybe it's a British thing that we do like complaining. Mind you, the French love complaining too. It's virtually a national pastime, complaining. And now I am French. I do feel entitled to complain about just about anything and everything. But I think sometimes we just all need to have a bit of an offload. So today, in this episode, I'm talking about the real everyday sort of things that grate. I wouldn't say quite friction, but things that grate about life in France. And, things that don't make it into the brochures and the magazine articles about life in France, but they do absolutely shape your experience of living here. And, you know, it looks effortless from the outside. You've got cafes, markets, the pace of life. Everybody sits round at a bistro with a red checked tablecloth, chatting to the neighbours or, the local inhabitants, and everybody's friendly and open and warm and welcoming. And that's the fantasy. And the reality is, there's a level at which it's true, but the reality of life is always different to the sort of dream, isn't it? And we're not talking big dramatic problems. We're talking sort of small niggles that you encounter every day, every week, all of the time. And on their own, they're small niggles and manageable, but over time they accumulate. And sometimes I think we all have days where you just feel like you cannot take one more niggle because you've just had it. So this episode, I'm talking about those everyday niggles, the ones that don't make it into the dream of life in France articles or the TV shows, but they absolutely do shape your experience of living here. So let's start with something simple and something that comes up again and again and again: opening hours. In France, things close. Shops close for lunch, offices close early. They don't even open that early. Sundays are effectively shut down days in many areas. Outside of big cities, almost everything is closed. And August is in a category of its own. Entire businesses just disappear basically for the month. People are en vacances, normal, nothing gets done. The same goes for the month of May, where there are numerous bank holidays. And this year has been particularly special with the way that the bank holidays have fallen. So people will often, if there's a bank holiday on Thursday, they will do what they call faire le pont, literally make the bridge, take Friday off. Saturday, Sunday are the weekend. So Monday, take that as a day off. You've effectively got a 5-day holiday. So this has a massive effect on business. And it isn't dysfunction, it's cultural, because the French prioritize rest, routine, balance, family time, and not work. But if you come from an environment, from the Anglo-Saxon world where everything is about working long hours and things being constantly available, this does create a niggle because you expect things to be open, you expect things to get done, and you're going to have to lose that expectation. You have to plan. You can't just pop out and get something done at any point in time. You miss that window and your task will get pushed back by at least a day or possibly even a week. And I've got used to that now, but there were times when it used to drive me demented when I would, finish work for the morning, be on a 2-hour lunch break and want to go and buy horse feed, but the horse feed place was closed for lunch. I just I had to accept it in the end and, rush to get there after work. I had 20 minutes before they then closed, but that's life in France. Then we get on to administration and bureaucracy. Now, France runs on paperwork, and I would say this is still very much physical paperwork, actual pieces of paper. It is getting digitalized slowly but surely, but forms, photocopies, proof of address, ID documents often need to be submitted in paper multiple times to different departments. And the process is never linear or simple. You might submit everything correctly and still be asked for something else. Or weeks can go by without any response, or be told something different by two different offices. And this is where persistence becomes a skill. You don't need to approach this from an efficient point of view, but from a persistent point of view. Things will happen, they will get done, but not necessarily fast. And one really useful tip a French friend told me was when you're phoning any kind of government office and you don't get the answer that you want on the phone, wait a while, phone back and speak to somebody else, because you're quite likely to get two different answers from two different people. Welcome in France, as the French say. Then there's customer service. Now, customer service in France operates so differently from what we're used to in the UK or the US. And it is less about the customer is always right and much more about mutual respect within defined roles, which means that as the customer, you're going to get less flexibility, less urgency, and occasionally a sort of tone that can feel abrupt or dismissive if you're not used to it. But you need to understand this isn't personal. This is just how France works. And for example, I went to Brico Dépôt last week to return 2 massive pots of paint, got them out of my car, put them on my trolley, got my receipt, went in there, saw the lady who was in charge of returns, who was dealing with another customer at the time. And she said, okay, put your trolley over there and I'll be with you. She then ignored me for about 10 minutes. She wasn't busy doing anything else. She was just ignoring me because that was how she was operating. And you just have to accept that. It wasn't anything personal. When she did deal with me, she was super nice, super efficient, but nothing I could have said or done was going to make her move any faster. And this is because employees are very well protected in France. Processes are fixed. This means they have much less incentive or expectation to bend rules to be for convenience to the customer, or even to go that extra mile for the customer. They do what they are required to do, nothing more and nothing less. So this niggle, I think, comes from us having mismatched expectations. We expect one thing and we get another. So you just have to accept this and adjust your the way you operate as well, and expect that you're going to have to wait 10 minutes until that person is ready to deal with you. Then we have strikes. Now, striking is a national sport in France, I would say. It's if not a national pastime, it's part of the culture. There are transport strikes, public sector strikes, service disruptions, not constant, but regular enough to be part of life. And I always comment quite tartly, the French always seem to go on strike in September, when nobody really wants to go back to work or school and the weather's still good enough to make striking quite pleasurable. Much less likely to happen in February when it's pissing down. Nobody wants to be on strike outside protesting then. But when strikes happen, they can be hugely disruptive. You get trains cancelled, the tube or metro lines reduced, schools are affected. It's pain in the arse if you're a working parent and your kids are off school because the teachers are on strike. And again, this is part of the French system. It's about strong labour rights, collective action. But from a day-to-day practical perspective, it can make your life sort of uncertain, unpredictable, quite irritating. You're going to need contingency plans, and I think you just need to learn tolerance for disruption, and accept that this is another part of life in France. Now, another thing that I think is problematic for lots of people is the communication and language problems that come about from not being properly fluent. And even though my French is fluent now, and I do, I can manage most things in life in France, I do still feel that I lack that nuance that I have in my native tongue. And I think when you're dealing with administrators or, formal phrasing and the expectations that a French person has, if you can't pick up on that nuance, it does make life difficult, and very small misunderstandings can slow things down quite significantly. And if your French is really quite limited, this is a major source of friction on a day-to-day basis, because making a phone call is really stressful. You're reluctant to answer the phone in case you can't deal with the person on the other end of it. You don't really know how to make appointments, and you're going to try and rely on written communication or email, which is often a lot slower. And I think this lack of communication it limits our access to France, and that is very, very difficult to deal with. It's very frustrating when you cannot express yourself clearly. And it's only in the last year or so, and this is after 20 years of living in France, that I feel now that I can express myself forcefully and firmly, whilst being just polite enough to get what I want done. And that's a skill that has taken me a very, very long time to acquire. And it was very, very, very frustrating when I knew that in English I would be able to be just rude and offensive enough, but not too much so that I would piss the person that I was dealing with off to the extent that they would refuse to deal with me. But I can now, but it has taken a long time, and I think language is a big niggle for a lot of people. And then I would say there's all those like small repeated delays that, we talked about earlier, waiting a bit longer than you expected. Systems that almost work. This is especially true if you're going online. Don't even get me started about the professional part of the government impôt site where you need to pay your CFE tax, because that you go from one website to another and it looks like it was designed on the back of a fag packet by a 6-year-old in about 1989, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And this kind of thing can absolutely drive you potty. But, again, it's just this sort of, well, this is France. That's it. That is the way this country works. And whilst all of these niggles can shape your perception of how easy or tough life feels, I think this is the part that people really struggle to articulate, that, there's nothing seriously wrong. Everything just takes a little bit more time and effort than you expected. But over time, over a prolonged period, if you have niggle after niggle after niggle, then sometimes you do actually feel like you just want to pick up your laptop and throw it through the window, because whatever you've been trying to do on it, it does not work. So how do you get over this? And you can't make the French government websites work more efficiently than they do. You can't prevent people taking their time when they're dealing with you. You can't prevent strikes. You can't prevent delays. So all I can say is that you have to adapt. You plan more, build in buffer time, and above all, lower your expectation of immediacy and things happening immediately and smoothly and just like that. start from the premise that it probably won't work, things won't go well, and then if they do, it's a nice surprise. Because I think friction in France is just part of the system, the life and the culture. Everything is pas possible at the start, and then with a bit of discussion and negotiation, it becomes possible, and you end up with the result you wanted. But you just have to understand that mentality, that it's going to be no, then it will be maybe, and then it will be yes. And this applies to bureaucracy, administration, personal interactions, you name it. Start from that premise, and I think you will find that your life here becomes a whole lot easier. Failing that, I suggest you make yourself a large coffee with a slug of Calvados in it and move away from your computer and go and do something quite different and come back to it the next day. Because that is also the tactic that I use when I'm not getting anywhere. Actually, not true about the Calvados, because it's one of the few things that I cannot drink despite living in Normandy. It would just totally poleaxe me, especially in coffee, especially in the morning. So forget my turn to alcohol tip, but put the computer down, step away, go and do something in the garden, come back later, and it will probably work. Anyway, I hope this has given you some food for thought and hopefully cheered you up if you are having one of those days where it feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall. Thank you for listening. Thank you, as always, to our wonderful sponsors, Fab French Insurance, and I will see you next time.